Thanks everyone for joining today's session, Unlocking Customer Expectations, Connecting Their High Hopes and Their Sometimes Harsh Reality. Now, before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. We'll have time for questions at the end, so you can enter those through the Q&A box at the bottom. Question we always get, will this be recorded? Yes, you're going to be getting a copy of this over the next few days. And then lastly, we have two panelists on today, and we have a third guest panelist, which is you, the audience. And we're going to be asking you throughout the presentation for your feedback in two polls. So today's agenda, first, we're going to meet our panelists. Then we're going to talk about the customer experience gap, that gap between what customers expect and what they're getting. Next, we're going to be talking about ways we can bridge that gap. After that, we're going to be looking at the panelists to provide some priorities, what they're focused on for the next year. We'll have some dedicated time for Q&A, so please enter your questions. And lastly, we'll give our panelists the final word with some key takeaways. So to get started, Isabel, do you mind introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit about your role and about Swift.
Yes, so hi everyone, and thanks to all for joining, and thanks for inviting me to the panel. So my name is Isabelle Carbon. I'm located in Belgium, based in Belgium, so for me it's the evening. I'm leading the customer experience enablement team. I'm in charge of the customer experience program at Swift. I'm reporting directly to the Chief Customer Experience Officer. So this is where we are located in the organization. So I don't know if you know Swift, but so Swift is a cooperative company. We have been created in the 70s with the objective to move money from one place of the world to the other place of the world. So we are mainly focused on high value payments, which is being moved between correspondent banking. So we are very much in the financial industry, and we have a lot of technology component as well associated to what we do. We also extended our portfolio to corporates and to securities players. And the objective for us is really to move money and move payments and security settlements in a trusted and instant way. Our brand value is instant, frictionless, and trusted. And when we have set up the customer experience strategy and vision, our objective was really to say, okay, we want to offer to our customer an effortless and personalized customer journey. This is really what we strive for.
Great, thank you. And thank you for joining us today. Fred, can you tell us a little bit about you and about digital AI?
Yes, good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, and thank you for having me here, and thanks to everyone for coming. I am a documentation lead inside digital.ai. It's a new company that was formed last year out of a number of other companies. You may have heard of some of them: Numerify, ArcSen, CollabNet, Zebia Labs, the one that I was associated with. And we came together to solve software companies build software using DevOps. And as such, it's a very rich environment. It's a very quickly moving environment. There are a lot of facets to it. People were generally used to each individual company that I mentioned. Now they have a much richer environment with our company and a lot of other product opportunities to build on what they already had with one of the member companies. And so we are trying to look like a fully integrated, merged company as quickly as possible, both from the product sense and, of course, also then following from the documentation sense. And that was a critical goal. I think I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure other things will come out as we go along.
Okay, great, thanks. And I'm Kieran Doyle, Director of Product Marketing at ZoomIn. If you're not familiar with ZoomIn, we help customer experience folks and documentation folks provide better answers for their customers and change the way their customers experience technical content by giving them the right answer to the right user at the right time. So as promised, we're going to start with our first poll, and keep the audience, awake, engaged. Hopefully, this will be pretty interesting to see. And then we'll talk about, how our panelists' experience compares with the audience. So where is the biggest gap between customer expectations and what you're delivering, specific for your organization? Is there an inability for customers to solve most issues themselves? Do you have an inconsistent experience as they go from channel to channel? Is the length of time to resolve an issue longer than the customer would expect? Is there just a lack of personalization and knowledge of what a customer is looking for? Or is there inconsistent information across channels or sources? So as we're going to leave that up for a minute, and I'll give you just a little bit of background from a recent survey we conducted this year with Frost & Sullivan to sort of better understand what was going wrong with the customer experience. So one of the initial findings was this gap between customers trying to self-serve and the lack of success that we're having. Specifically, that 81% wanted to self-serve and only 6% were successful on that on their first attempt. And this, of course, is not in keeping what we're all used to in the consumer world. We're not just enterprise users. Eventually we, come home, or maybe we're working from home, we step out of our office, and then we enter the consumer world. And when you're used to Googling for instant answers, you turn on Netflix and you have all these personalized recommendations, or you shop on Amazon and it's a completely frictionless experience. This experience doesn't quite measure up. And as we dug into the data, we noticed this pattern that customers had a real lack of confidence that they could find what they're looking for, which was reinforced in the real world. And that was especially when they were searching for technical or product-related answers. They were spending 7 to 10 minutes searching. They were getting the wrong answer, just shy of half the time. And experiences like these were impacting how they saw the products they were using and whether they would stay with them, as you see from that 84% churn number. So with that, let's look at our poll results, if I can pull them up. Okay, perfect. So, okay, so there's a fairly strong feeling around self-service, so inability to resolve most issues themselves, and then, length of time to resolve an issue and personalization are pretty close. So Isabel and Fred, why don't we have you go first this time? Where do you think, in your experience, customers are seeing the biggest issue with kind of fulfilling their expectations?
So I think that from our perspective, the problem has been primarily that they are unable to find content. They're unable to, particularly if they've, in our company, joined because of one of the products they used, and they're trying to take on other products. There's a discontinuity between the documentation, and some of it is appearance, some of it is content, some of it is approach. But I think that's the biggest part. And that translates directly into a longer time to find things and some anxiety about whether they're going to find them at all. But I think those are the core pieces for us.
Okay. So the Frost & Sullivan data sort of resonates with you as common issues. Okay, great. Isabel, how about you? Where do you think, in your experience, there's a biggest gap in sort of customer expectations?
Yeah, so from our side, definitely the ability to resolve issue themselves is one of the area that came very strongly. We surveyed like early this year our entire customer base in the area more of self-service in order to assess, is it really what you are looking for? And there I'm coming back to your results where you say 80% of the customer are expecting to self-serve. For us, the ratio was a bit lower, but still above and way above the 50%. We were more on the 65, 70%. And as a consequence, we said, but what is preventing you from being able to self-serve yourself? And the most common topic that came back was to say, we struggle to find relevant information. So they are really lost in a sense in the search capability. There is a lot of information at their disposal in a lot of areas and different front end and touch point, and that was really the number one difficulty that they have.
Yeah.
And the second point that came was the lack of personalization. We have a quite complex portfolio, quite technical. We have more than 50 different products, let's say, into that. And our customer, most of the time, they have 3 to 4 products, something like that. Some of them have more, but on average. And when they were searching on our website and trying to find information, they got a lot of hits which were related to products that they didn't have, and they didn't even know what they were in their portfolio. So it was not at all individualized and relevant for their search, getting them even more confused in a sense, which was creating quite a lot of frustration.
So do you think that self-service and personalization are sort of 2 sides of the same coin then? That if you provide a customer with the most relevant options, it sort of takes care of that self-service issue in a way?
Yeah, but what we believe is that if we manage to already improve the search, even if we don't have the ability to know exactly what is the portfolio behind of our customer, because let's say we don't have yet the link towards this data and this information, it would already solve quite a lot of the issue, because the relevance is the first element we believe we should be tackling. Then comes the knowledge of the customer more from an individual perspective, but on which you need to be able to grab more data and more information in order to be relevant. And there is as well some learning, let's say, that you need to grab as well, depending on what they are typically looking for as individual, depending as well on the because we are in B2B, so it's not an institution that is making, but it's the individual behind the search, because of the different personas that are using our products and services as well.
Yep. And I think we talked about this earlier, was, with GDPR, the personalization aspect, it's like, it's getting tougher. I mean, it's really tough. And I think it just, like anything with technology, it's the trade-off. How can you say, if you give me this information, your experience will be better? It's sort of a leap of faith that customers have to take in order to get that final result that we all want.
Yeah, you need to have their trust and also demonstrate the value that's indeed, if they provide you more information, you are able to provide a much more individualized service. But it's a trusted relationship that needs to be definitely created there.
Sure. Fred, anything else on this before I move to the next section? I just want to give you an opportunity.
I'd love to amplify a little bit of that. We're a little bit earlier on our course here, and so personalization hasn't yet become a big issue, but we are fundamentally doing technical documentation as opposed to support information at this point. So people are not so much coming to find the solution to a particular problem or a specific kind of thing. They're trying to learn the content. And so I think we find ourselves in a place where they may not know what's out there, and so they don't know what they're missing. And it's kind of a vicious circle here. And trying to improve things with taxonomies and standardized kinds of approaches has been a very viable and appropriate way to try and chip away at that. One of the things that I do see as a disconnect, we've, like so many technology companies, focus on what our products are, how you use them, all the features and details. But our message to customers is often around the business problems they can be solving. And so connecting those two and allowing people to work from what they read on the major site, and then applying that to how do I actually use your products to make those things happen, that I think has been a big gap that we continue to work on.
Got it. And actually that brings us into our next topic, which I'll start right now with a poll. So, we've identified the problem. Now we're going to get your feedback on how best to solve it. So if we could launch our next poll. So there we go. So what is the most effective way again, in your experience, to bridge this gap between expectations and reality? Is it to make it easier for customers to self-serve or resolve issues themselves? Is it to provide a true omni-channel experience? Is it, and by that we mean, journey continuity. If you go from one channel to another, they continue where they left off. Is it about having more support agents with product expertise, more data on individual customer activities and behavior, that personalization aspect that we talked to? Or is it about having consistent information across sources and channels? So as you answer those, I'm just going to give you, again, just some things to think about. So another interesting data point that we found from the Frost and Sullivan survey was that a little more than half of the support inquiries, based on the users that we surveyed, were resolved with existing content. So what that means in layman's terms is that customers have spent all this time trying to self-serve and they can't, so then they submit a support ticket. And then the answer that the agent comes back with is something that's not necessarily hard to access or something they didn't have access to, but it was just something sort of hard to find. So in a way, we're sort of outsourcing self-service from the customer, so what the customer should be able to do, to the agent themselves. So the size of this issue is only growing. So based on Zoomin's customer base, around 70%, give or take, of our customers' aggregate website traffic is for product documentation. So not the slick marketing sites that you expect everyone to go to. They're looking for product answers on how to use the product. So not having this easier experience, you could be basically frustrating 70% of your traffic and leading them to look at alternatives. So this part of the conversation is about good things. So the good news is that in contrast to that 84% churn number we saw in the previous section, 90% of users, based on the survey, said that a good content experience would lead them to recommend a product. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So let's take a look at what our audience responded with. Okay, so yeah, I guess this is sort of the other side of the coin from the challenges. And the number one challenge was the ability to self-serve. And it looks like the number one solution is the ability to self-serve. So Isabel, let's start with you this time. In your experience, where do you see the biggest opportunity to bridge this expectation gap? Is it self-service, as the audience said? Omni-channel personalization? Where do you think the biggest impact could be?
Yeah, for me, I fully agree with the feedback from the audience. I think if we manage to get the customer to self-serve, it's serving their benefits, because they will be able to solve their issue faster. And it's also serving some of the purpose of the organization. I guess you all have the same purpose of being as efficient as possible and reducing your cost in a sense, and also making sure that your agents are working on the more complex cases where real value add can be added. If it's a question of knowledge gap, in a sense, that can be gathered through existing documentation or information that you can provide through an automated way to your customer, this is probably the best approach to take for both perspectives, the customer and the internal, I think. Mm-hmm. And maybe one more point there is we also spotted that when we are saying customer, in the end, this is also really helping a lot our support agents, because they were suffering from the same difficulties, in a sense, trying to find themselves, because they cannot be expert. One individual cannot be expert in all the products and services that we have. And making it easier for our external customer to self-serve is also making our agents easier for them to serve the customer. So it's kind of also of a dual benefit from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And yeah, I've seen statistics and costs over the years of agent attrition in a contact center being close to 30%, meaning that every 3 years the entire contact center is totally turned over. And then in terms of training costs, anywhere from, 50, and the numbers vary, anywhere from $15,000 to $18,000 per agent to train them. So just multiply the number of agents you have times, 18,000. And that's what you're spending over 3 years just to retrain people that are burned out from answering the same questions all the time when they want to, have something more challenging and really have an impact on the customer experience. So great. Thank you for that, Isabel. Fred, over to you. Where do you see the biggest solution for bridging that expectation gap?
So I think this is another place where we may be earlier on our path. I think there's definitely a commitment to getting the self-service and to be able for people to find things and answer their own questions. But I think some of the connections between our information haven't been developed enough yet to enable that. So we're looking a lot at customer behavior and what their product usage is, so we can use that to skinny down the set of information that would be relevant to them. And we are also working hard to build more connections between things so that the effective use of the product becomes much more apparent. You get, our product is very much, the sum is greater than all the parts. And if you're just looking at pieces, you're really not getting the benefit, as well as it not being a great business situation. So enabling things to people to work from where they've come into our world, and then find the additional things we offer that we know they're trying to do with some products, but if they could only see how to connect it to what we're doing, then that would be more effective, and there would be one shop where it would all be much more consistent, which would be obviously the very big benefit to the customers. So, and we don't have a lot of opportunity for agents other than support. I will say that support is something that we have. I mentioned that we've been doing technical documentation particularly, but we do want to move that to interactions with the support approach and others to also help connect the dots between not only the products, but then real use cases, real issues, and so on.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned earlier how digital.ai had been sort of a collection of different products that acquired. And I think, having what you said, a more sort of curated journey for them to understand how to navigate that, both in terms of product adoption and information, is great. That's a great idea. And actually, it's not even one of the options we have. But I think it ties into all of them, of this, like, hey, if you can create a very clear roadmap for what the customer should do, you can check off a lot of these boxes in terms of, consistency of information, knowing what they need and helping them self-serve. So that's great.
Yeah, if I may
Sure,
add maybe
sure, of course.
one point which we didn't really cover and on which we are currently quite deeply investigating is that the quantity of the type of information and quantity of information that the customer can absorb is limited at every point in time. So what we are really trying to say is try to identify across the entire journey, from the exploration, let's say, that the customer will start to have on a specific product, for instance, to the adoption, usage, and then potentially investigation to get to another enhanced product. They need really different information and different type of flow. And we are trying to really adapt our documentation and kind of spoon feed them with the right information that they are needing at which step of the journey. So really trying to understand where do they stand in their journey, and when is it the right moment to provide them with information, rather than to provide them with the flow of information all at once when they are not really ready to grab it and to get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I like that concept of, you don't have to make every user a product expert. You just need them to be a product expert on like the question that they have today. So yeah, that's great. So before we get into the last section, just wanted to give the audience an opportunity to start submitting your questions, which we'll have time for right after the next section. So we're also going to give you a break from answering the polls, and we're going to go right to our panelists and just see what are you focused on for 2022, and maybe what the audience should consider, whether they should be following in your footsteps, or maybe even how you got there, if they're sort of a little bit far behind and looking for some guidance.
So one of the things that we're looking at is turning our readership into a community that is active and works with us. When customers can explain their goals and how they've been able to achieve what they're after, or expose what they're trying to do, it's much more compelling to other customers. It will have a dramatic impact on our content, and hopefully they can answer questions effectively to their peers as in ways that we may not be able to as well. And so increasing the interaction between the customers and our products and our documentation is one of our most important goals, I'd say. The other thing is we did start this path with technical documentation. I mentioned integrating with support, and we see a big benefit there. That's where particularly the self-service and time to resolution becomes just even more important. And they've had their approach, but giving them better access to our technical documentation, using personas of support people so they could have different paths through the documentation that they could curate for themselves over time, will allow them to incrementally build up a much more rich environment that will be able to, they'll be able to answer questions more quickly and help customers at a much deeper level.
Okay, so just on that second part, it's sort of like in a contact center, there's skill routing. So, Jane always gets the questions around this individual product, sort of matching that on the agent side, saying, if you're getting all the questions that are related to this topic, then you always, these are all the answers you need. Sort of tying together, Isabel, what you were saying before, like spoon feeding, but it's internal spoon feeding instead of external.
Yeah, so maybe so for us from a priority perspective, so in 2021, our main focus was to, let's say, grow the collective intelligence from internally through the support agents, where we have run a big project in order to improve the quality of our content and also to improve the learning that we got from the different cases that were coming in our support center, in order to create those knowledge tips and knowledge bases information, which are the recurring patterns that are coming. And then for us now, 2022 is really, I would say, the year of a technology upgrade from that perspective, because now that we managed to increase our content richness, let's say, we want to bring the technical capability, and we have two to three main projects from that perspective. So the first one is definitely to increase the relevance of our search. So there we are implementing a new search engine in order to make sure that we are able to leverage from the content that we have in order to bring the right relevant content to the customer. We are also evolving our documentation platform in order to make sure that we are more agile in the buildup of the information, in order to bring it kind of by pieces. You see towards the customer. It goes back to my example on the journey, because we can have a big piece of documentation of work. A big piece is one thing, but then if we manage to chunk it up into smaller pieces where we say those pieces could be relevant at different moments and should be brought at different moments of the journey, that will be the right thing to do. So that we can only do through the upgrade of our documentation platform. And we are investigating as well from a self-service perspective, the digital adoption platform. So meaning that we try to embed into our application self-service help, kind of, which is also content delivery, which is delivered at the right moment in the journey. Again, we see the customer doesn't click at the right place. We have kind of a bubble popping up saying, okay, here, if you go there, you will be able to find this. And we are really still at the baby step of this third element, where we are trying to test it and to see if this could bring value. And next to all this self-service capability increase that we are trying to do, there is the aspect of the knowledge and on the voice of the customer, trying really to understand what are the patterns of usage of this documentation, the happiness that they get through the self-service or through the work with the support agent, that we are also trying to work on in order to make sure that we are going in the right direction, that the steps that we are taking will bring the necessary value in order to increase the happiness of our customer, and making sure it goes towards the frictionless, which is our objective.
Great. Is there anywhere someone should start with that? Because I know, both of you had plans that are maybe a little bit more advanced. So where, if a company's starting out, they have documentation all over the place, their customer experience journeys are sort of fragmented. Where would you say they should start at a sort of basic level? Is around just having that search as sort of like a step one to bring everything together? Is it looking at, what customers are doing in order to build a plan from there? Like, what are your thoughts?
So for us, it was, since our content came from companies that were completely independent beforehand, it's not just a matter of putting search on top, because there's inconsistencies, and I'll just leave it at that. So one of the things that I think anyone really would need to do at the beginning of this is to have a thorough inventory of what they have in content, but also in the metadata and taxonomies and other things behind it. Because at some point you want to focus a consistent and rich body of information that doesn't have a lot of the inconsistencies just waste time. And so if you don't have that to start with, you're going to find that you go down the path and your solutions will be incomplete. So you really have to have that inventory first, I think.
Got it. So it sounds like there's no quick fix. It's the infrastructure that you can't skip over just to get to the quick win.
Yeah, and I tend to agree. Content is kind of the first start, even if it doesn't need to be perfect. It needs at least to reach a certain minimum, because otherwise you are putting search on crap, let's say, and that wouldn't help in a sense. Huh? So we need to make sure that there is a minimum level of quality of your content. But I think you should also target it based on the area where it's making most of the pain, in a sense, because targeting to improve the entire content, I don't know for your organization, but for us, we have huge pieces of content. So we really had to pick and choose which area we wanted to target, which were our strategic product first. And then we said where we get most of the question, or where we see there is most of the friction, that's where we started from. And then move to the search capabilities is probably the next good step to take.
Got it. So now we're going to move into, I feel like I've already started asking you questions, but we're going to move into the audience questions. So if you have any questions, please start adding them now. We have a few. So how have you built a business case for customer experience investment, especially when it's hard to measure the direct impact? Isabel, do you want to start with that one?
Oh my God, yeah, that's a struggle of every day in a sense. It's to convince of the value of the different actions that we are taking. What we try to do is to identify a few elements and metrics, let's say. Satisfaction is clearly one of the elements that we are trying and considering. Then the other element that we saw with the different projects that we started to launch is most of the time there is internal efficiency that are directly linked to external happiness, I would say, because as soon as we spot where there is issues and friction, most of the time it means that our internal processes were quite complex, and by looking at it and doing, for instance, customer journey mapping on some of the processes that we have, we managed to gain efficiency internally, which were kind of funding the investment that we were making. Mm-hmm. Not all the time, for sure. I don't say it's a direct link one-to-one, but that was really a nice, let's say, thing that we discover along the way into the topic. And then there is as well the, and it goes to a bit to the same, the case deflection is another area that we are really trying to look at, especially in the area of self-service, is do we see that when we are trying to improve self-service in specific product area, that we start to see cases decreasing and having case deflection in those areas. And there is quite a good link as well between the two, which is helping to serve for the future changes and business case that we are doing. But the return on investment is something that indeed we definitely need to prove every time we are putting investment on the table.
Yeah. Yeah. And Fred, same question to you. Do you think there's an easy way to measure sort of that customer experience, and how have you helped sort of justify that focus?
So much of this just seems common sense to me, and people have learned the value of these things, but I know we need to prove it on a regular basis. We haven't talked that much about analytics or KPI, key performance indicators, or I think that's how we're looking to do this. I mean, so at the beginning here, we knew what the path was. We needed to get a consistent set of documentation that was integrated in with a better search engine. And that was just kind of a knee-jerk reaction. From here, though, it's a matter of then seeing what the customers actually do. And we're not only instrumenting the documentation, but our products as well. So we better understand what people are doing. And we can then also run tests to try out things and determine whether the results are good or bad. And we have an active user experience team inside the organization. But we know we need to go down all those paths with some kind of consistent, measurable process so that we can try things and know that with real life, we are getting better results. And that should, I would hope that would be the answer.
Yeah, and it sounds like sort of a walk before you run. So do some kind of pilot or proof of concept to validate, and then you can sort of extend it beyond that. So that's great. And actually, so Fred, another one, I think we'll start with you, but is it just me, or is documentation getting more customer experience attention? And I think you both, I mean, you both mentioned documentation and content as this sort of central part of the customer experience. So is that a wider trend that you're seeing?
I'm not sure I've seen the statistics, but it does certainly feel that way. And we I don't know. I'm not sure if I have a much stronger answer, really.
No, I mean, if this sort of session is any indicator of that, I think it's definitely getting there's more of a link between the customer experience and the content they're getting. And I think, Isabel, you may have even mentioned this in so many words earlier.
Yeah, because for me, so in the context of the entire customer journey, we do customer journey mapping. And what we see is that, knowledge is needed at every step of the journey. So the knowledge is a transversal capability. So if you want to improve on different steps of the journey, you know that you need to improve your access to knowledge and information to make it easier for them to go through the step. So I think that's why it has so much importance, is that it's just a transversal capability that you need to make sure that you are maturing and evolving in order to improve your overall customer experience, because it will hit you at every steps of the journey, you see?
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. So we have time for a few more questions. So this is sort of a fun one. So what's a customer experience fad you think is getting too much attention?
Oh.
Fat is a pretty strong word.
Yeah, and I have nothing coming to mind directly, because I guess there is so many stuff that are important in a sense into the customer experience aspect. Maybe I will say something a bit strange, but I will say the product sometime itself. It's the you see improving the product to the nitty-gritty detail sometimes is defeating the purpose, because we think that if we are evolving the product to perfection, it will help the customer experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not always convinced from that perspective. I think the experience is having sometimes much more impact than improving the product to the end of its perfection. I don't know if I'm making myself clear here, but
Yeah, I think it's like I'm going to make up a term, but like the Appleization of products. Everyone thinks their product should just be so simple that no one needs any guidance ever. And it's just not a realistic expectation. Especially in the enterprise world, they're sophisticated products that do more, so they're going to be complex. So you're going to need this support, which is why, to your earlier point, we need to do things like, understand where they are in their journey, give them the right information at the right time for the right role, instead of saying, hey, just use the product and we don't need an instruction manual. You'll know how to do everything from there. Just not realistic.
Yeah, I agree. Not realistic and not always expected. I think for us, we are in a quite complex technical business. And I think it would be an utopia to think that the customer would not need any support or any help. We know they will need some. We try to make it just as easy as possible, I would say.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, all right. Fred, did you have something on that?
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree. I mean, we're relentless at building procedures, building scenarios, building all kinds of things that are focused on very specific activities to make people be more effective.
All right, so we're going to do one last question. It's a long one, so just be ready. And Fred, I think this is more directed to you. So can you speak to the relationship between app or software developers and support content creators when it comes to creating and deploying help systems and apps on online platforms? I often see a gap in that relationship that leads to a poor support experience. Do you want to weigh in on that?
Sure, a little bit. I think you can find lots of everything. I was a developer for a long time, and I've seen many different approaches with different emphasis from different organizations and so on. In general, I would say that support knows so much about what customers are really experiencing and what the real pain points are, that to not use their information and even just data reduction of all the tickets they get, then it's very hard for developers who I think over time who have been getting further and further from customers. I think it's very hard for them to see that. So collaboration is good, and the question, the person asking the question mentioned development and support, and I think there's a real symbiosis there that is very important. And it goes not only for help information, and we're trying to align our documentation with the help information, with what support is doing and all of that. But it's also going for things other than help. It's the product, how it presents things. It's how our documentation works. So it's really one big microcosm where we're all trying to work together and make it all more consistent. And in fact, I think I'm seeing our help text looking much more like parts of documentation, and it's all connected as well. So anyway, there's an evolution toward that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Isabel, anything on that before we close it out?
For us, the support engineers are creating a lot of the documentation, and not the documentation, I would say, at the start of the product, because there the product team is much more capable to do it. But as from the moment they start to get cases and they start to see issues, and so then they are starting to draft, let's say, documentation in order to support their colleagues, because they will have most probably the same questions that will come back, and as well the customer directly. And we are starting to make those let's say internal articles visible to the customer as well, because it's a big piece of learning that we have from that perspective.
Yeah, that's great. So before we end, first, thank you to our panelists for joining. Thank you to the audience for your great questions and in your free research from your polls. So, Fred, any final thoughts before we end here today?
I suppose just, since we're closer to the start of our path into a combined approach to everything, being very thoughtful about what your goals are and the steps along the way, and knowing what you're starting with. And little wins can be very important along the way, but it's inevitably a long path. And building for flexibility, and things change all the time. So just being very thoughtful about it is, as much as you can do it, it'll pay itself back.
Yeah, that's great. And Isabel?
Yeah, chunk it up, really. So I think the vision, you need to have it for sure, but don't aim directly for the end solution, because that would be too much to show, either for your business case that we discussed before, but as well for the people to change within the organization, I think, and even your customer to follow your pace of change. So for me, it's chunk it up and prove value with some little elements step by step. And that's the best way to reach your ultimate goal and objective.
Great. Again, thanks to both of you. Again, to the audience, you will be getting a copy of this. If you're interested in seeing any of those stats I shared earlier, you can get them on zoominsoftware.com in our resources section. And again, thank you both, and have a great day.
Thank you. See you. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.